Coffee was being introduced as a cash crop. Freeze-damaged top leaves, bean density changes, and 14% overplanting of new seedlings to compensate for cold losses sent him looking for some answers, and he found cycles through history that affect food production that will affect all of us. David's work describes the expected changes and how to survive and thrive during future challenging times with practical preparations. His website is called oilseedcrops.org, linked up at coasttocoastam.com. And again, his book is called Climate Revolution. David, welcome to the program. Looking forward to this tonight.
George, thanks for having me on. Important because I think we all eat, and because food is going to be the most valuable commodity on the planet moving forward. Where do we sit today, and then how do we get through this chaos of the first year of incredibly low plantings, hyperinflationary food prices, and the upsets in civilization that accompany that, but with a little preparation and understanding where we sit today and where we're going to in the next 12 months in a short term, I think it's going to be a good show, because there has to be excuses why food's going to become unavailable and inexpensive, and then governments are going to have to pivot to the response when the food shortages start and the people become angry.
Was it your experience, David, as a coffee buyer that gave you that aha moment that something could go wrong here?
It was, because I was a believer 100% in global warming, because that's all I grew up with in the media was telling me that CO2 was causing this, CO2 was driving climate change. So I believed it. But when I went to Myanmar, and that's the country where the coffee buying took place, was Burma. Myanmar is the new name for it, but Burma, that is near the equator. And to have them tell me the stories of when their grandfathers were planting, and yes, they were getting cold damage every year, some 100-plus years ago, I really went to the cycles. But here's an interesting fact. A place called Bagan is a little bit north of Pin O Luin in that central area in Myanmar. There's 10,000 Buddhist temples there. In the past, they were covered with solid gold. And that place is at least 2,000 years old, but it's built on top of remnants of another prior civilization that very little is known about. So yes, there's cycles within cycles on longer terms and also these shorter term cycles. And once you start to pin it down, you can get a good gauge of the onset of the cycle, because the onset is going to be the most devastating for food production, because we've had almost 150 years of stable planting dates and harvesting dates, and suddenly all of this is going out of its normal flow, and it's an unknown at this point. There's a lot of crop damage already, and things just aren't getting in the ground, and now we have fertilizer shortages, and it just seems a little bit planned to me on the way this is unfolding.
Now, when you say a little bit planned, David, are you saying that they could concoct this to keep prices high on purpose? Would they do that to us?
Well, prices are one way to look at it, but material scarcity or non-availability or non-deliverables for the farm inputs to grow the food to then give to us, the populace. There's something far different than the money, the available food to put into your belly. You can't print that out. Central banks cannot print food to put into your stomach.
That's right.
And yeah, we're at this crux right now where it seems like the de-evolution of all things supply chain is going to lead to, I guess, a financial crisis, layered over a military crisis, layered over a political crisis, a supply crisis, material scarcity, inflation cost crisis. These are all the indicators right now that we're beginning into this cycle that is going to be cataclysmic. It is really going to reshape planetary civilization in these next 12 months.
I was at the grocery store yesterday, David, and they had signs on a lot of different sections in the aisles that, they're out of this, they're out of that because of supply chain issues and things like that. What do you think's really happening?
Well, if you take a look, and I hate to say great reset, but, in this grand scheme of things, COVID is going to appear small compared to what's coming with the food shortages. And I would go out on a limb and say this on the record. The way they're going to push everybody into food rationing is to get you onto a digital rationing card. A lot of people did not accept it for the COVID. A lot of people did not get the vaccine, so they don't have the digital COVID passport. But if you're starving or your kids can't get food or you're food insecure and like you say, there's going to be a lot of inavailability, or we're going to move back to more of a seasonal diet. And even those choices in a seasonal diet are going to be limited. People are going to do strange things when they're hungry. And lining up to get a facial recognition ID, to get a digital rationing card so I get my 1 pound of butter per week or whatever it is.
Jeez.
You people are going to move and gravitate to that so quickly, you're going to watch the earth shake under you how fast everybody will adopt this.
Do you believe, David, is that real? That could happen?
It's planned to happen. Already, digital rationing cards have been inbound for at least 6 months as far as I know.
Sounds like sign of the beast.
Basic income. They're going to have to give some money to raise the level of standard for people to buy more expensive, hyperinflating food costs. So you're going to get this overlapping of digital issuance from a government for their money, fiat, into this same wallet that contains your ration card and possibly your Vax passport. It's all going to be one system with facial recognition.
How many years away do you think this is?
Oh, not years, months.
Really? Oh, boy.
Oh, by harvest season this year, by October. Oh, absolutely. I have some timelines I wanted to discuss tonight, too. So, it's not about being on the whole fear base here. It's about, okay, we have a problem. We can thrive during this time as well. But if you have the timelines to see how this is going to amplify in certain months as we go through the next 8 or 9 months to harvest season, you're going to be much better informed to be able to make wise decisions with your money and your time.
Let's go through some of those timelines, David. Go ahead.
Well, as we come now, you started with the news here in the beginning of the hour. Well, I peruse the ag news and climate extreme news when I do my looking at the news during the day. So, eyes are on Ukraine. And here's the strangest thing. These two countries that we hear about in the news the last 6 months, Kazakhstan, Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
They're both major bread baskets within the Eurasian area. And somehow Kazakhstan's not going to be planting this year, so that 10 million tons that's usually earmarked for wheat to go to China's not going to be there. And then we see the debacle happening in Ukraine. The farming is going to be 15% of the normal, so they lost 85% of production coming out of there. And the way it looks right now, as the farmers are planting, this is the most important thing. When you're looking at where things are going in the ground, the fertilizer shortage is currently because the railroads restricting fertilizer deliveries, and the farmers, will they have an intention to plant corn or wheat? This is going to start making the headlines for anybody listening to this show, and if you follow the ag news or more business financial news, they're going to get a really good indication of what was not planted and then the extreme costs for this. And that's going to be the red light. I'd say 20% of the global populace will understand the plight we're in by that point.
How many nations, David, will go hungry and starve because of these shortages?
Smaller economies that rely 100% on imports for energy and agriculture, or I wouldn't, maybe not 100%, but well over 80%. Any of the smaller independent nations that use other central bank currencies for their purchases, dollar or whatever they're using. Sri Lanka is a good example. They ran out of dollars, so they couldn't get their inputs. Smaller nations first. But it will eventually roll to these larger nations like our own right here. May will be the first check the box. At the end of May, you're going to see markets and people start to change their behaviors. Once the realization's here that the food's not going to be grown and prices are going to rise and rise and rise, possibly doubling by the end of the year yet again with the inavailability and choice.
And this doesn't even mention yet at this point something happening solarly with the sun or anything like that. These are all man-made issues.
That's correct. Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up the sun because that's really what it's all about. See, these cycles were known. For 500 years, you have to look what happened across this planet. They sent out their navies to go and pillage what we understand in South America, Central America, parts of Australia. Like these records were taken back and synthesized, for a better term. The cycles are well known and mapped out. The ancient cultures had mapped the sun and the cycles of the sun, and how when the sun goes into a state of low solar activity, our jet streams and cloud cells move in an unpredictable fashion.
That's so right. David, we're going to take a quick break. We'll come back and pick it up right there on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. George Noory with you, David Dubine with us. His book is called Climate Revolution. David, what is more concerning to you, the climate situation that could affect food shortages and prices, or the man-made situations, or both?
Well, I think the sun and the interplanetary magnetic field creating these changes is what the globalist leaders are trying to take advantage of. They're riding on top of a natural cycle to implement different changes here on Earth. So for me, I'm looking at it as indicators that the cycle has started. So if there are going to be sweeping changes from our sun through the Earth all the way out to Pluto, then we should start to see different changes across the planet. So May 21st, 2020, Pluto's atmosphere collapsed. And then just a few months later, on December 15th, 2020, Neptune's atmosphere reversed direction. And then just a week ago or so, they started to come out with all these different images of Neptune on how it's cooled so much. That, again, that's electromagnetic effects. And then Uranus had these X-ray flares that jump from the planet out to the rings, visible with the naked eye. No recording of instrumentation needed to see that with the naked eye. And then Jupiter's auroras are 10x the normal. And then what's that? It was Mars in July of 2021. There were night side auroras, and it doesn't have a magnetic field on Mars. So what had happened is the mineral veins and the mineral composition of the crust started to glow with the auroras, and then magically we have satellites falling out of the sky with Starlink. That's gravitational drag in the atmosphere. And supposed collision of satellites, that's all compressing our atmosphere too. So we're looking at all these different atmospheric anomalies. So that's just another indicator that the cycle started. And yes, elites are terrified that they need to gain control of the planet and the global food supply before we take it back and go into more of a decentralized system of farming, starting with your own garden at your own house.
And we've been spoiled, David, as people. We've been spoiled with abundance, and we've been spoiled generally with pretty fair food prices. I'm not sure Americans are going to handle it if things get out of control.
Well, I have some prior prices here. If we can use history as a gauge of what we could expect. So I'm looking here from 1755 to 1800 on the chart. This is in Switzerland and Czech lands, which is Czech Republic today. The rye and the wheat during these times of low solar activity increased about 4x. And then you can go back into the 1600s, prior 1690, and see the same thing, that generally when we hit these cycles, you're looking at about a max 4x or fourfold increase in food pricing. And there are some, like Six Sigma events that are out of the norm that are 7x or sevenfold increase in pricing. But as a norm, if we can just go based on history, we can anticipate a fourfold increase in food prices at the apex of this, I would say, somewhere around 2023.
Jeez. Now let's go through your timeline starting with May of 2022. Tell us about what happens with the railroads and situations like that.
Yeah, well, currently the railroads have stopped delivering corn and animal feed into the dairies in California.
Oh,
now, see, this is a massive problem there because the water with the drought, there's water rights that are below ground with the aquifers, and there's also, above ground with the rivers. So a lot of farmers used to grow their own fodder and their own crops just for their own dairy herds or for their own herds. But with the drought there, now they're all the way over in Indiana and Ohio looking for corn to bring it back and different feed to bring back. But California also uses a lot of waste residuals in processing from everything. Anything that you can think of in ag that has a processor as a waste product, that can be then used for animal feed. So the rails have stopped a lot of fertilizer deliveries. For example, right in the middle now with the applications, they've stopped. So it's incredibly limited. That's why I say I think it's deconstructed on purpose. It's going to have a massive effect on what we can produce in the fields. And like I said, May is when they're really going to get the reports of what was planted and what was not. Now, we're going to go into a corn shortage globally. I mean massive shortage, not a little bit, but a massive, gargantuan shortage of corn. And if you trace corn, the supply chain, what is corn used for? Everything.
Well, it's also used for ethanol, right?
Ethanol, and then almost everything that you see in a supermarket box has some constituent of corn, whether it be the high fructose corn syrup, whether it be corn flour, corn starch, whatever. Corn is the backbone of the food supply of America and globally as well. That's coming to roost at the end of May this year. Once we realize what's happening, there's going to be that aha moment.
That's only a month away, David.
Right. And then we come into the crop tours from the United States Department of Agriculture, the USDA, and they're going to look out and see nothing out there in dismal and stunted growth because they didn't have the fertilizers or herbicides, which is also in shortage. And then that's really going to spook. And I believe by that point, 50% of the globe will have woken up to the plight we're in of not producing enough food. And then when we come into October of 2022, this is where it gets real spooky because everybody on the planet will understand. And this is what I think a global panic for food. The riots will start. They're going to station troops inside the supermarkets, and
oh my God,
troops are going to be stationed at the food warehouses and grain silos across the countryside in America. It would not surprise me if there were troops deployed to farms around America, and that was a normal thing you would see United States military in our farmlands to protect the food from quote-unquote flash mobs. You know how they put flash mobs in our consciousness?
Yep.
Well, they're going to flash mob a few grain storage facilities or some kind of food storage warehouses, and then that'll be the catalyst, problem, reaction, solution to put troops out and occupy all of the farmlands. Now, your protection, of course, George. Your protection. Your safety.
Is this a prediction on your part, or is this something that you know from the inside?
A bit of both. I know for sure that the dairies in California were offering military protection, but that protein source goes back to buyer of choice off of the military.
What happens if the Ukraine and Russian situation gets resolved pretty soon?
Well, they're going to miss the planting dates in the Ukraine. They could come they'd have to switch crop then at that point. I don't know. They have another month or so to get it in the ground, but we still have the same problems, the fertilizer and the herbicide shortages. And, I talk to people smarter than myself, and they're telling me, because I was trying to work out, okay, if you reduce fertilizer application by 1%, how much grain yield will that decline? And it's a 1-to-1 ratio. So if you reduce global fertilizer or fertilizer percentages application by 10%, you're going to lose 10% on the yield. Well, the same is with herbicides, but there's a shortage on both. So if you're looking at a 10% shortage on fertilizer and a 10% shortage on herbicide, you're actually looking at a 20% decline on the acreage yield, and that's the minimum we're going to experience. The bare minimum globally is 20% decline this year in global ag production.
You have talked about an infant formula rationing program, and that's underway already?
Well, that was underway, and it's the same thing that's happening of limit purchase of two, whatever you go in. We've seen this during COVID. You walk in, there's a sign that says limit purchase of one or limit purchase
we saw that with the paper goods in the beginning of COVID,
right.
Remember? Yeah.
I do, yeah. But they've changed the wording now to rationing. See, they're trying to, I don't know if it's an uptick in terms of get ready for rationing or if it's actually trying to drive true panic for people to run to the stores. Now, think about the demographic. It's mothers. We're rationing baby formula now. It's not a limit of 2 per trip per purchase anymore. No. It's rationing. And that is Walgreens, and you can check that out. It was just released last week. The change of lexicon is definitely a step up in either awareness or panic button push, one of the two.
That's scary. What's going on with the fertilizer, which affects the plants?
Unknown. I mean, CF Industries came out 6 months ago and said that we were looking at 12% decline globally in fertilizers, and now it's manifested, plural, past tense, into now there's 30 companies that are having trouble producing fertilizers, and Union Pacific Railroad is having magic troubles to get it to the farmers in the Midwest. And everywhere you look across the world, and now just even in today's news headlines, they're predicting a 10% global reduction in rice production because the farmers in Asia can't afford the fertilizers, and it's getting really lean out there as well. So it doesn't matter if it's corn or soybean or sorghum or millet or whatever you grow, cotton, and now it's rice. So everywhere around the entire planet is being affected by this. And I don't know why they can't get the fertilizers produced to get. This is national security right now.
Absolutely.
We've got to feed our people. We must.
We're going to take calls with David next hour, and if you could also share your stories in the grocery store with us on shortages and things you've seen over the past couple of years. We had a guest who has passed on. I love the guy. Robert Felix wrote a book, Not by Fire, but by Ice. He was convinced that we are in the early stages of another ice age, David. I think you knew him or knew of him.
I did. We'd spoken at the same conference twice, and then he gave me one of my first, what I considered big breaks, to have an interview with him back when I was very small, starting out with this research. And he was saying, yes, you're right on the right track. And, he also wrote the book, Magnetic Reversals and Evolutionary Leaps.
Yep.
And we start to see this where when we get down steps or changes in the interplanetary magnetic field, the human consciousness changes the way that we perceive reality because of the magnetic changes, not only on our Earth, but the solar system. And if you look back, the zodiac explains these energetic changes as we go through the cycles of every 2,000 years around. But then astronomy explains where we sit within the heavens as we transit through in a point A, point B, or different kind of XYZ axis. But the zodiac explains the energy associated with this area of space that we're transiting through. So yes, evolutionary leaps were very possible, and you could see why perhaps governments are instilling so much fear across the planet. So whatever is happening with these natural electromagnetic changes that would make us more intuitive or have other abilities are being suppressed at this time through fear in these changes.
Tell us about the book, Climate Revolution.
I wrote that quite some time ago. It was 2019, and that's where we were then. And there was a lot of predictions in the book explaining electromagnetic changes, what were expected. We would see solar system-wide changes, and then how governments would respond in lockstep to these changes as citizens became unruly and very uncontrollable because of food pricing, food scarcity, and hyperinflationary events. And as we sit right now, everything moving out to 2024 in October, when the gas giants square themselves into a second magnetic field, which should have some additional effects on our atmosphere and jet streams, it does seem. I'm in the second edition right now, editing that to bring it up to, we sit here, this is what was said for forecast, here we are now, and, get a better gauge moving out to 2024.
David, I'm in the Midwest right now. I double between Los Angeles and St. Louis. I'm in St. Louis right now. And, whenever a weathercaster would predict severe snowstorms or things like that, the store shelves were immediately emptied from panic buying. I mean, immediately. What would happen if they knew what was going on right now?
They would panic buy, but everything else, as you see this material shortages right now, and material scarcity, a lot of things, we're at the point now where the days of being able to order things and get them to prepare for this situation, it's past already. So think of ourselves as being marooned after a large shipwreck or something like this. Okay, the ship crashes into the island. All we have is all we have, and that's the best we can do. So, to take steps to be able to grow your own food, get off the system, start building the soils around where you're going to be gardening. It's going to take a year or so to catch up, but, thinking to get off this centralized system as much as we can and start thinking in that lifestyle change of this well-oiled machine of delivery has broken down, and it will continue to break down every single day from now. So to jump in front of it and start to embrace these changes, that they're here. And we're going to have to live through this, all of us together, and that's the reason I do my research, because all of us collectively can figure out situations, solutions, ideas to pull us through this. But we're going to have to start thinking about our own food autonomy first, because that's the most important thing. food has collapsed civilization time and time and time again. Why was it the Indus Valley collapsed? Oh, their climate change. They couldn't grow enough food. What about Harappa? Go over to Mesopotamia, the Fertile Crescent. Well, it's not so fertile and crescent-ish now, is it? It's a desert. Well, what caused those massive changes?
Well, good point.
Food first is going to be the most important thing. We can deal with the electromagnetic changes second, but you're going to need food, and you're going to run out of your stored food if you don't know how to grow food, replenish it, work with your neighbors and community to keep those nutrients, micronutrients and vitamins and nutrition coming back into your brain along with fats so you can think clearly when this transition's unfolding.
Do you actually believe that there's going to come a time where people go to the stores and they won't be able to get anything?
Yes, and that will happen October of 2022, if not sooner. They're going to go in, and the choices will be very limited if some things completely disappeared.
Will they even be able to let them in? Will they let them? I mean, during COVID, they restricted people in terms of how many could go into the store at any given time.
Right, that was training for what's going to come at the end of the year. But at this point, there'll be armed soldiers out in front of the supermarkets, and you may have to show your digital rationing card to get in. You may be able to go in and pay, but they still will limit what you can buy at that point. It's going to be, I believe, this whole COVID, there's a lot of ways to look at it in different layers, but at least one aspect of that was to train the general populace. You can't have that like you always did. Like you said, we always could buy what we want.
It's called mind control, David. It's called mind control. We're coming back next. We're going to talk more and take phone calls with you on Coast to Coast AM.